Masechet Menaḥot Daf Chaf Gimel Itmar Kometz de Minchat Chote Sheshimno. If someone has a korban mincha of a sinner, that's a sinner who has to bring an olev yored and he's poor, that brings only flour. There's no oil. In fact, we're going to see the pasuk that one is not permitted to add oil or frankincense because he's a sinner. He has to bring a lowly korban. Now, you take the flour and you take a kometz from that flour and you're going to burn the kometz, and then the kohanim will eat the rest. But what happens if one takes that kometz and puts oil? Someone puts oil on it. Is it still a valid korban? Can you still burn it, or does that ruin it? Machloket. Rabbi Yochanan omer pasul. Rabbi Yochanan says it's no good. The pasuk says don't put oil on it, and now this has oil on it, so it's no good. Rish Lakish amar hu asmo meshachshecho be'shiyareh halog u'ma'alehu. Rish Lakish says, listen, even in an ideal case, you actually do put a little oil on the kometz. The way it works is you have the sinner brings his flour, plain flour. You take the kometz. Now, in order for it to burn well, what the kohen would do is he would take the kometz and wipe it in the leftover of the log of another korban. When people bring a regular korban mincha, so they're going to bring a log of oil. Now, when you pour out that log of oil, there's still some remnants of oil on the sides of the vessel. Then you have to clean it out with soap to get that out. So those remnants of oil, which are sanctified anyway, so you take the kometz and you just wipe the oil off with that kometz, so you have at least a little bit of oil, so that when you burn it on the mizbeach, it will burn well. So therefore, Resh Lakish is saying, listen, in any case, even in an ideal circumstance, you actually do put some oil onto the kometz. So therefore, it can't be that bad. And so too, if someone would add oil to the kometz, although you're not supposed to add a lot of oil, we're just doing wiping off a little bit. But nevertheless, if a little bit does not make it pasul, then adding oil, although one should not do that lechatechila, but b'diavad, even if you added more oil, it will not make it invalid. We ask about Resh Lakish. V'haketiv lo yasim aleh Hashem v'lo yiten aleh lebona. Resh Lakish, how are you going to explain the pasuk that says you shall not put oil on it? You cannot bring frankincense. It's not just it's not just that you don't have to, but you shouldn't put it. You're not allowed to put it. That just means that you cannot designate oil for it as you would for other meal offerings. That the person bringing it says, here's the flour and here's the oil that I'm donating it, and it's designated for it. So that you can't do. So that's why you could just take some other oil that was really meant for another korban. There's still a little bit left over, and you wipe it off. And so too, if you bring some other oil that was for no other purpose, just regular oil, and you pour it onto it, so it wasn't designated from before. A big difference here is that the prohibition would be to add oil to the original flour mix. But in the case that we're dealing with here, one is adding oil not to all the big bowl of flour, but rather only to the kometz. So when it says this prohibition, this is you don't designate from the outset oil. Here's my flour, here's my oil, and you mix it together from the beginning and then take the kometz. That is certainly not allowed. But here, he brought just the flour, and he took the kometz with just the flour. And then you would wipe a little oil onto it. So if you take some other oil and pour it on, it's still valid. Rabbi Yochanan is going to challenge Resh Lakish from a baraita, also found in the Tosefta. This is related to the machloket between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda that we saw in the previous daf, in the Mishnah. It says here, Charev shenit arev bebalul yakriv. Rabbi Yehuda omer lo yakriv. My love, komes de minchat chote, diara bekomes de minchat nedaba. The Baraita teaches that charev, a dry meal offering, like that, we'll see what that means. We're going to assume that means that of a sinner. It's dry because it has no oil on it. That got mixed up with another korban mincha that is a mixture of flour and oil. Tanakama says you can still offer it up. This would make sense with their methodology yesterday. The rule that they said yesterday is two things that are meant for burning on the Mizbeach are not batel one to another. And therefore, even if they're mixed together, they don't lose their identity. And this oil that belongs with the mixed one will keep its identity, and the dry one will keep its identity, and therefore that's totally fine. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you cannot offer it up, because Rabbi Yehuda, his derivation, his rule was min bemino and batel. If you have two things of the same kind, like blood and blood, then they do not nullify each other. It keeps its identity, and so if you had some sacrificial blood, you can continue to sacrifice it. However, Rabbi Yehuda said, in the case of Korban Mincha, that's a mixture of flour and oil, so now the flour of one of them will nullify the oil of the other, because that's min b'she'eno mino. And so therefore, that's a problem. And here, you're going to have the flour of the dry one, and that can nullify the oil of the other one, and then you won't have sufficient oil, the right ratio for that one, and you'll have too much for this one. Therefore you see a machloket. Now, let's assume that this case is talking about the same case that we're talking about here. That's a kometz of a minchat choteh. You took a kometz from a sinner's offering, which is just flour, and that got mixed up with a kometz of a minchat nedava, of a regular free will offering, where you also just take a kometz. And so both of those, a kometz and a kometz, one is totally dry, one is flour mixed with oil. They get mixed up for each other, and since both are meant for the Mizbeach, Tanna Kama says that you can burn both of them. Now, it's not clear what the question is, because I'm assuming the question is from Tanna Kama. He's not going to ask from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is a minority opinion anyway. And so if you're following Tanna Kama actually says, Yakiriv, it's permitted, it's a valid korban. And that looks like it actually supports Resh Lakish, who also says it's a valid korban. So what's the source of the question here? It seems that the question is that the Tanna Kama in this case says it's okay because you're talking about two korbanot. You have a dry korban and a mixed korban, a kometz of each of them, and both of these things are meant to be burnt on the Mizbeach. And therefore this fits with the rule that one thing that's meant for the Mizbeach and another thing meant for the Mizbeach, two things that are oleh, will not nullify each other, so they're both totally valid. But this is a bit different from the case that we proposed here, because here it is a kometz of a minchat choteh, that's the same as the charev. But here, sheshimno, you just put oil on it. Now that oil is just oil. It's not another korban, it's not another kometz, so therefore it's not something that is designated to be burnt on the Mizbeach. So this is actually worse. So therefore, from the fact that they're arguing on this case, it seems that Tanna Kama would only permit the charev if it's mixed with another kometz of balul. Fine, then they're both meant for the Mizbeach, they don't nullify each other. However, if it's a kometz that's meant for the Mizbeach, that's mixed with oil, just some other oil, well, that oil is not designated for the Mizbeach, and therefore it doesn't belong there, and it will nullify the flour. If there's too much, it will ruin the korban, because you're not supposed to put oil on it. And therefore, that's the question. Rabbi Yochanan es Shakish, to even Tanna Kama, who is more lenient than Rabbi Yehuda, only permits a kometz and another kometz. But a kometz that's just flour with foreign oil that is not going on the Mizbeach, the Tanna Kama never permitted that. And then Shakish answered, Lo minchat parim ve'elim be'minchat kebasim. No, in fact, when it says harev, shitarib bebalul, it wasn't talking about a sinner's korban that has no oil. It meant relatively dry as opposed to relatively more moistly mixed. And it's actually talking about a korban mincha that comes along, that accompanies a pad and an ayil, versus a korban mincha that accompanies a keves. For these, a pad and an ayil, you bring 2 log of oil with a tenth of flour. For the keves, you bring 3 log of oil with a tenth of flour. So the ratio of oil to flour is different in each. And that's where Rabbi Yehuda says it's no good, because you can have a different ratio, and the oil and the flour is min b'she'eno mino, and therefore the flour of one will nullify the oil of the other, and therefore it's no good. But Tanakama says that since they're all meant to be burnt on the Mizbeach, and here you don't even have to say a kometz of one and a kometz of the other, you could say, or it could be the entire flour, because all of it gets burnt. And according to Tanakama, since they're both meant to be burnt on the Mizbeach, they don't nullify each other, and therefore it's permitted. But they're only talking about like a case like this, where it's a mixture and a mixture, and he says it's okay. They weren't discussing at all a case of when it's dry with something else. In the case when it's dry and it's just grain, then actually that might be even better. And maybe everybody would agree that that's okay, because when it's dry, so all that's meant to be burnt here is the flour itself. Now you have something extra that's added in, some oil from somewhere. Well, that's just not part of this korban at all. So we could just ignore it. It happens to be here. But if it's a minority, so it's not like it's so much oil that it's going to nullify the flour. So it's just some other thing that happens to be here. In other words, when you have two korbanot that both require oil, then the Rabbi Yehuda would say, it has to be, make sure it's the right ratio, because they both require oil, and if it has the wrong ratio of oil, then it's no good. But if you have a dry korban that has no oil to begin with, well then, some other oil that happens to be around actually might not even be a problem. And therefore, this baraita is not relevant. Hold on, there's another baraita that explicitly talks about a situation of charev, and includes that in the machloket. It says here, minchat parim ve'elim ve'minchat kebasim ve'charev shintareh bebalul yikrab Rabbi Yehuda omed lo yikrab. Here it includes two cases. One, the one that we mentioned here, minchat parim ve'elim, which is a 2-to-1 ratio, with minchat kebasim, which is a 3-to-1 ratio, or a dry korban mincha that gets mixed up with a mixture, regular korban mincha that has flour and oil. There, Tanakama says it's okay, and Yehuda says it's not okay. And so now we'll ask the question again. It looks like it'd be the Chachamim. Tanakama only says it's okay when it's a korban mixed with another korban. But if it's extraneous oil, then it would not be good. So a question against Rabbi Resh Lakish, who said that a charev, sinner's korban with extraneous oil, is permitted. Well, but Tanakama didn't say that here, and he addresses the case. And we answer, actually no. Perushe kamefaresh la. This second line, charev shitareh bebalul, is not a new case of a sinner's offering, a dry offering, but actually it's an explanation of this first case, that when you have minchat parim ve'elim together with minchat kebasim, that is relatively dry versus something that is relatively more mixed with oil. So compared to minchat kebasim, which is 3-to-1, minchat parim ve'elim is considered dry. So that's what it's talking about. This charev is actually a commentary, an explanation of the first case. But in fact, even in this baraita, you're not talking about a sinner's offering, and therefore, since it's not talking about a sinner's offering at all, it's not a question against Resh Lakish. Ba'e Rava, a question Rava asked. Lo kometz shemisa shamno al gabe asim mahu. You have a kometz of a regular korban mincha that has oil and flour mixed in. Now you mix it in, and now with the oil is going to be absorbed into the flour, and it's like a batter. Now, and you're supposed to take that whole thing and burn it all on the mizbeach all together. That's the ideal. But what if you took that kometz and you squeeze it, and when you squeeze it onto wood, onto firewood, and so some of the oil drips out, separates, and goes into the wood. Now you're going to burn everything in the end anyway. But the question is, does the oil have to be burnt together with the flour, or is it okay just to take that flour and you put it on the wood, and then it's all next to each other, it's all connected to each other, and so if you burn it all together anyway, it's still okay? That's the question. We ask, Chibure olin ke olin damu, or lav ke olin damu? Something that is attached to something that is burnt on the mizbeach, is it considered also part of it? And so here you have the kometz, which is the main thing that you're burning, but that kometz that still has some oil in it, and the flour, and it's attached to, it's sitting on top of the wood, and the wood itself has that oil that got absorbed into the wood. since it's next to each other, do you say it's all together, so it's okay? Or do you say, no, the oil has to be actually in the flour, and it's not sufficient that it just be next to it, it's not considered part of it. Amar le Ravina Rav Asher, Lav Hainu Rabbi Yochanan v'Resh Lakish. Ravina tells Rav Asher, it seems that your question would be subject to the machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish. But another one, not the one we just said. Ditmar, Hama'ale Eber she'en bo kezait ve'esem mashrimo lechezait. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Chayav, Resh Lakish Amar Patur. This is regarding the prohibition of offering a sacrifice outside of the temple courtyard. One is liable for burning a korban outside the temple courtyard only if you burn at least a kezait. Now, kezait of what? Meat, or can you include the bone when you're calculating the kezait? So someone who brings a limb, and the limb does not have a kezait of meat on it. But if you include the bone, then the bone plus the meat does have a kezait. And someone takes it, it's a korban, and you burn it outside the temple courtyard. Rabbi Yochanan says one is liable. Resh Lakish says one is not liable. Why? Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav, chibore olin keolin damu. Resh Lakish amar patur, chibore olin lav keolin damu. Rabbi Yochanan says one is liable because something attached to an item that should be burnt is like that item itself. And therefore, since the bone is attached to the meat, we count it together with the kezait. Since he says something that's attached to something burnt is like it, so Rabbi Yochanan then presumably also would say that the oil that drips into the wood, that's okay. It's considered all one. That oil in the wood is considered one with the komets, and it's all burnt together, and therefore it's a valid offering. Whereas Lakish, however, says patur. If someone took meat and a bone, and there's half a kezait of meat and half a kezait of bone, and he offers it outside the temple courtyard, he is not liable. Why? Because he says something attached to something that is burnt is not like the thing that is burnt on the mizbeach itself, and so the bone does not count. And you can, if you have a sacrificial meat connected to a bone, you can put the bone on the mizbeach in a regular proper korban. You can put the bone because it's attached, fine. But it's not going to be considered as part of the shi'ur of the kezait that one would need to be liable. And so since he says it's considered not part of it, so too, presumably, Resh Lakish would say, in this case, the oil that went into the wood is now no longer considered part of the komets. And now you're burning a kometz that doesn't have the proper amount of oil in it, and therefore the korban, that korban mincha, is invalid. So isn't this a parallel machloket? And we say no, not necessarily. Tibay Rabbi Yochanan, Tibay Resh Lakish. Navash question can be asked within Rabbi Yochanan and within Resh Lakish. Tibay Rabbi Yochanan. Ad kan lo kamar Rabbi Yochanan hatam ela be'etzem demina de basarhu, aval hayde lav demina de kometzu la. Rabbi Yochanan only said that something attached is considered part of it when it comes to a bone, because a bone and the meat are all one type, one thing. It grows together. It's part of the animal. And so they're biologically part of the same thing and attached to each other. That's where Rabbi Yochanan would say, listen, it's part of the animal, so we'll count the bone as part of the meat to make up a kezait. However, in this case, where the oil is not biologically one with the komets, and so here, if it's all mixed together, fine, that's one entity. But if you squeeze out the oil and it goes into the wood, now it's already not part of it, and therefore it's not going to be counted together with it. And even Rabbi Yochanan, who says that we count the bone, would not count the oil that goes into the wood, or maybe he would. So we don't. So we can ask Rava's question within Rabbi Yochanan. And or Dilma afilu Resh Lakish lo ka'amar ela be'etzem debar mifrashu ve'iparish lab mitzvah lahadureh. Or we can ask the question within Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish only says that it's considered a separate item when it's the bone, because the bone could become separated from the meat. And if it does become separated from the meat, let's say the bone is separated from the meat and then falls off the mizbeach, there's no mitzvah to put it on, because there's no mitzvah to burn the bone by itself. If the bone is separate from the meat, then you don't burn the bone on the mizbeach. You only put it on there because it happens to be connected to the meat, but the bone itself, there's no mitzvah, independent mitzvah to burn the bone. And so maybe that's the case where the Shakish says we consider them to be separate, and that's why he doesn't count it as part of the kezayit. Aval shemen delav bar mifrashu la or demalo shena teko. However, the oil and the flour both have to be burnt. And so the oil is not something that if it's separated, then you don't have to burn it anymore. No, the oil the oil itself, one is obligated to burn. So it's not a separate item, and therefore the Shakish, who says we don't count the bone as part of the kezayit for the meat, may very well say that you do count the oil, even though the oil is separated from the flour and goes into the wood. Nevertheless, the oil independently has to be burnt. So it's not something that you could just separate and then not burn. And therefore, he might agree that it's valid in this case. Or maybe it doesn't matter, and maybe the oil is like the bone, and he wouldn't make a distinction. Teko, we leave this question standing, but the point is that the machloket between Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan is an independent situation, and not a parallel case to this one of the oil getting squeezed into the wood. Next Mishnah, Shete Menaḥot shelo nikmesu v'nit'arebu zo bazo. Im yachol likmos mizo b'fnei atzma mizo b'fnei atzma kesherot v'im lav pesulot. You have two korban mincha offerings. You have the flour there, and you did not take a kemitzah, and the two got mixed together in one big bowl. If you can take a kometz from this one by itself and that one by itself, let's say it got mixed into a big bowl, but the korban mincha A remained on the left side and the other one got poured in and remained on the right side. So you can still identify more or less which one is which, even if they're somewhat mixed in the middle, but you can find a spot that is definitely all A, or definitely a spot that's definitely all B, and you can take the kometz from those two spots, then it's all valid, and you can burn both of those kometzes, and both of them are valid. However, if it's all mixed up and you can't take a kometz from them, then it is invalid. Kometz shenit'areh b'mincha shelo nikmesa lo yaktir, v'miktir zo shenikmesa ola laba'alim, v'zo shelo nikmesa lo ola laba'alim. Second case is you had korban mincha A and you took a kometz from it, and that kometz got mixed into mincha B, and mincha B, the kometz was not taken from it. And so now you have a mixture of kometz within a raw korban mincha that is all the flour and everything, and was not yet kometz was not yet taken from it. In that case, one should not burn it. Because what are you going to do? You just have to leave it, because you're not supposed to burn something that is not designated to be burning and to be burnt, and before you take the kometz, you don't burn any of it. However, b'di'avad, let's say you took the whole bowl of the kometz mixed with the korban mincha from which you did not take a kemitzah, and b'di'avad, you burnt it on the mizbeach already. Well, the one that you took the kometz from, that will fulfill the obligation of the owner, because that one, he brought his flour, you took the kometz, and the kometz was burnt on the mizbeach. So that's no problem. It just happened to be burnt with a bunch of other stuff. But the kometz itself was burnt, so that fulfills their obligation. But the second guy, whose korban mincha he brought, but there was never a kemitzah taken, he does not fulfill his obligation, because you can't just burn the whole thing. You have to take the kometz first and then burn it. So he has to bring another one. Nit'arev kumsa b'shiareha o b'shiareha shel chaberata lo yaktir v'miktir ola laba'alim. Third case is you have one korban and you remove the kometz. Now you're supposed to take that kometz and put it into a separate vessel and burn only the kometz. But let's say he dropped it and it went back into the remainder of flour, or it dropped into another remainder, a little bit different from the previous case. Here, you have two korban minchas. You took a kometz from A and a kometz from B. So now that's good. But the kometz from A fell into the remaining flour of B. In that case, you should not burn it lechatechila, because this flour here that the kohanim is supposed to eat, and if the kohanim is supposed to eat it, you're not supposed to burn that flour, even though it's mixed up with the kometz, but it's also just remainder flour. B'diavad, however, if you did burn all that flour with the kometz in it, then it will fulfill the obligation for that person from that, because his kometz was burnt, so fulfills his obligation. All right, we're going to come back to these cases, but first we're going to go into a case of a different kind of case of mixtures regarding nevela and shechuta. Amad Rav Chisda, nevela betela bishchuta, she efshar leshechuta shetease nevela, ushchuta ena betela binvela, sheefshar linvela shetease shechuta, tilchi masrecha parcha tum'ata. If you have nevela meat, nevela is an animal that died, but without shechita. It is not kosher, and also it imparts tum'ah. And it gets mixed up in shechuta. So you have a small amount of nebela that gets mixed up into a big pot of meat of animals that got proper shechita. The ones that got proper shechita are tahor. They're good. So this will be batel. Why? Because it's impossible for the shechuta to ever become nevela. Once a meat is shechuta, it's not going to become tameh like a nevela. And so therefore, in a way, it's more stable. The identity of shechuta is more stable, and the identity of nevela is not so. What I was about to say is that nevela can become tahor. How? Well, let's read it. Shechuta ena betela benevela. If you have shechuta meat that falls into a lot of nevela meat, it's not batel. It keeps its own identity, that shechuta. Why? Because nevela can become like shechuta. It doesn't become kosher, but it can remove you can remove its tumah status. How so? When it rots, when it smells, then tumah leaves it. So tumah is only going to apply to it when it's edible, right? When it's fresh. But when it rots, then it's no longer food, and therefore it loses its tum'ah. Therefore, nevela does not have as strong of an identity as shechuta. So for that reason, nevela that falls into shechuta, so the nevela will become batel, because after all, the nevela eventually can become like a shechuta, and so therefore it becomes batel. The shechuta itself is never going to become like the nevela, so the shechuta keeps its identity, and that's the majority, and the nevela is batel. And the other way around, shechuta it goes into nevela. Well, the nevela can become shechuta, so the nevela is not so strong, and therefore the shechuta that falls into it, even if it's a little shechuta and a lot of nevela, will not become batel. That's the opinion of Rav Chisda. Rabbi Chanina says the opposite. Kol she'efshar lo lihyot kamohu eno batel, v'chol she'i efshar lo lihyot kamohu batel. If there's something that can become like something else, it's not batel. Therefore, according to Rabbi Chanina, if nevela falls into shechuta, it's not going to be batel. Then it's kind of like a min bimino, eno batel. So, similar to that. We're going to bring that in a second. But the idea is that it can become part of it. You know what? That nevela is not batel. And the other way around, shechuta that falls into nevela, the shechuta can never become like the nevela. And so a little bit of shechuta that falls into a lot of nevela, precisely because it can never become tameh like the nevela, that is batel. Okay, it's more like min besheno mino, which generally is batel. So different kind of reasoning. All right, now let's compare it. Alibad deman, these two amoraim, whose opinion are they following of the Tanaim that we saw back in the Mishnah on the previous daf? I alibad rabanan ha'amri olin hu de la mebateli hadadeh aval min bemino batel. Are they following the rabbis the rabbi said that two things that belong that will be burnt on the mizbeach are not mebatel each other. But now we're not talking about korban meat here. We're just talking about regular non-sacred meat. It's not meat that goes on the mizbeach, and therefore, what is it? It's just min b'mino, because it's meat and meat. Well, generally, when we say min b'mino, it's talking about the substance of the meat. It doesn't matter if it's shechuta or not, or nevela or tameh or tahor. It's meat. It tastes the same. All comes from the same kind of animal. And so therefore, min b'mino batel. So therefore, in both cases, nebela and shechuta or shechuta and nebela, both of them, the minority should be batel in the majority. And it shouldn't matter which way it is. So therefore, it doesn't make sense that they're following Rabbanan. Iyalibad Rabbi Yehuda. Veha Rabbi Yehuda batar chazuta azil. Idi min b'minohu. If they're following Rabbi Yehuda, okay, fine. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't care if it goes on the mizbeach or not. His ruling is min b'mino eno batel. But when he decides what is min b'mino, he says you go by the appearance, right? Remember, he said, blood of this type of a sacred animal with blood of another, blood of a chaya. As long as it's all of the appearance of the same thing, then that's called min b'mino. And it doesn't matter what its legal status is, if it's nevela or shechuta, will not make a difference. And it's all min b'mino. And according to the Yehuda, min b'mino eno batel. And therefore, in both of these cases, nebela and shechuta and nebela, it should be none. It's not, but none of them are batel. So neither Rabbanan nor the Yehuda would make a distinction between nebela and shechuta versus shechuta and nebela. So who are they following? Ela alibad Rabbi Chia, detan Rabbi Chia, nebela u'shchuta betelot zo bazo. So rather, Rav Chisda and Rabbi Chanina above, they're both following Rabbi Chia. For Rabbi Chia taught that nebela and shechuta, they do become batel one into the other. Okay, fine. So they're both following Rabbi Chia. But Rabbi Chia himself is later than Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. So we ask Rabbi Chia alibad deman, what would Rabbi Chia himself say about the matter that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan were arguing about? I alibad Rabbanan ha'amri olin hu de la mebatili hadadeh ha'min b'mino batil. Vi alibad Rabbi Yehuda kol min b'mino l'Rabbi Yehuda la batil. We're just kicking the can back. We're just ask the same question. Okay, fine. That they go by Rabbi Chia, but Rabbi Chia himself, who does he follow? If he follows Rabbanan, they say that if it's something that is burnt on the mizbeach, it does not become batel. But if it's not something that burned on the mizbeach and it's min b'mino, then it is batel. So therefore, shechuta nebela shechuta, they should both be batel. Vi alibad Rabbi Yehuda kol min b'mino Rabbi Yehuda la batil. Rabbi Yehuda says anything that's min b'mino is not batel, and this shechuta nebela are min b'mino, and so either way should not be batel. We assume that when Rabbi Chia says nebela shechuta betelot zo bazo, he means in one direction but not in the other direction. So that's good because it fits with Rav Chisda or Rabbi Chanina, but it does not fit with Rabbanan, because Rabbanan should say that both ways are batel, and the Yehuda would say neither way is batel. Leolam alibad Rabbi Yehuda v'chi ka amar Rabbi Yehuda min b'mino labatil hanemi lehecha de'efshar le'lemeheve kevateh aval hecha de'lo efshar le'lemeheve kevateh batel. In fact, they're following the opinion of Rabbi Chia is following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And when he explains that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is limited, when Rabbi Yehuda says min b'mino is not nullified, that's only if it's a situation where one item can become like the other item. However, when one item cannot become like the other item, then it is batel. Now, which is which? Which way are you going? So that's the machloket. Ubahakami palge. The Rav Chisda sabad batal me batel azinan. So here Rav Chisda interprets the Rabbi Chia's interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda to mean that we look at the mevatel, the thing that's doing the nullifying, that's the majority. And therefore, if the majority, the big thing, is something that cannot turn into something else, meaning if the majority is shechuta. Shechuta cannot become tameh like a nevela. And since the shechuta cannot become like a nevela, therefore the nevela will be batel in the shechuta. But the other way around, not so. Then you say lo batil. So Rav Chisda interprets it that way. Whereas Rabbi Chanina savar batel azlinan. He says, no, this rule, we look at the thing that is being nullified. So if the thing being nullified cannot turn into something else, then it is batel. So that would mean that the thing nullified is the shechuta. If the shechuta falls in to nevela, so since the shechuta cannot turn into nevela, it will be batel. But if it was the nevela that fell into the shechuta, then you would apply the rule of Rabbi Yehuda, min bimino la batel. Now we're going to return to the Mishnah and use that to challenge the two opinions we saw. We're going to have one challenge against Rav Chisda, then two challenges against Rabbi Chanina, and then back to a last challenge against Rav Chisda. So first, proof for Rabbi Chanina, challenge against Rav Chisda from our Mishnah. Tenan. Shetem matanot shelo nikmesu v'nitarebu zo bezo. You have two korban minchas. A kmitza was not taken from either of them, and they were mixed into the same bowl. Im yachol likmot mizo bifnei atzma umizo bifnei atzma kesherot v'im lav pesulot. If they each remained on one side of the bowl, and you can still do a kmitza from this by itself and from that by itself, that's perfectly fine. They're valid. But if not, if it got too mixed up, then you cannot do it anymore. Here's the question. V'hahacha, kevan de kamitz le mechada, idach hava le shirayim, ve'la ka mebateli shirayim le tibla. In this case, you have to do the komets of one of them first and then the other. And once you do the komets of one of them, then the rest of it will become shirayim. And now what do you have in the bowl? You have shirayim from one korban mincha and the full mixture, the original mixture from the other one that you didn't take the komets from it yet. Now, in this case, it says it works, so that means we would not consider anything to be batel, and specifically, we would not say that the shirayim of the one that you took the komets from will not overpower, be a majority over the tebel in the sense that you haven't taken the komets out yet. And now, why would it be if you put all of if they're equal size, and you put all of that in the bowl, then actually the shirayim should be a little bit less because you took the komets out from it. So this is a difficulty. You have to say that maybe not everything is in the bowl, so maybe not all of the korban that you didn't take the komets from, maybe not all of it is in the bowl, so there's less of that in it, and therefore you take the first komets, and now you have more, if it's a case where you have more of the shirayim than tebel, well then the shirayim will nullify the tebel, and once it's nullified, now you can't take a komets from it and it won't be valid anymore. But we don't say it's batel in this case because the Mishnah says you can go ahead and take a komets from the other side and then it'll be okay. Now, whose opinion will this be that you do not? It's not batel. Mane ira banan ha'amre olin hu delam bebatili hadadeh ha'amin b'mino batil. The rabbis said that only if it's two items that go on the mizbeach, they are not mevatel. But in this case, it's not two items that go on the mizbeach. The shirayim doesn't go on the mizbeach, and the original flour that you didn't take the komets yet from also does not go on the mizbeach. Neither of them go on the mizbeach. And that's the only case where it's not batel. But if it's min b'mino, it is batel. And so this is min b'mino, so it should be batel. Therefore, this Mishnah cannot be Rabbanan. Ela peshita Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, fine. So it must be Rabbi Yehuda who says that it's min b'mino, and that's why it's not batel. Fine. However, Bishlam Aleman Damar Batel Azlinan, Batel Have Kim Batel. We said that Rabbi Chanina and Rav Chisda are both following Rabbi Chia, who interprets Rabbi Yehuda to say that it depends on what's on the status of one of them, if it can turn into the other. So this Mishnah will make sense according to Rabbi Chanina. In his understanding, we look at the batel, the minority portion, to see, can the batel become like the mivatel? Can the minority portion become like the majority portion? Well, in this case, the minority portion is the tebel. And once you take the komets, then right from the tebel, then it will become like the mevatel. And so therefore, since according to the Rabbi Chanina, if the batel can become like the mevatel, then there is no nullification. All right, it'll become like shirayim also, and so they'll both be shirayim. And so in such a case, there's no nullification, and therefore this Mishnah would make sense. We want it to be not nullified so that we can go ahead and take the comments from the second korban mincha. So this works well with Rabbi Chanina. Ela leman damar batar mevatel azlinan shirayim mi ka havu tibla. But according to Rav Chisda, who says we assess whether the mevatel can turn into the batel. And in this case, the mevatel is the shirayim. Well, shirayim can't go back to being tebel. You can't, even if you put the komets back and mix it up, it's not going to become tebel again. It can't go that way. And therefore, in this case, since the mevatel cannot turn into the batel, therefore the whole thing will be nullified. And so the shirayim will nullify. If there's a minority of tebel, it will be nullified, and you wouldn't be able to take the komets from it anymore. So this is a challenge against Rav Chisda. Lema alibad Rav Chisda de lo kerebi Chia. Some don't have these words alibad Rav Chisda. Anyway, then should we say that if we, according to Rav Chisda, he would have to say that our Mishnah does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Chia? How will he explain it? And the answer is Hatam kedirbi zera damar Rabbi zera nemra haktara bekomes nemra haktara b'shirayim ma haktara mora bekomes en hakomes mevatel tachavero af haktara mora b'shirayim en shirayim mevatelin et hakomes. He will say that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera says that it says the Torah gives a law regarding burning of the komets, and it also gives a law regarding burning of the shirayim. They're opposite laws, but they are both laws. And so it says regarding the komets that you have to burn it. It says regarding the remainder that you shall not burn it. The kohanim have to eat it. But nevertheless, since the Torah gives two laws about each of them, so we bring them into conjunction with each other. So just like when it says that you burn the komets, one komets will not nullify the other. That's a rule. If you have two kematzim, then they're both, you can take them both and burn them both together. One is not mevatel the other, even if they get mixed up. So too, since it says the word burning regarding the shirayim, although it says don't burn it, but nevertheless says the word, so we can make a gezerah shava between them. So too here, this is such a general rule that the remainder of one korban will not nullify the remainder of another korban. In this case, when you take the komets from one, now you have the remainder from that, korban A. And even if that's the majority, but the other one is, simply a tebel, which contains within it eventually what will be a komets and a shirayim. So there's still, most of it is shirayim, is going to be shirayim. It's already shirayim now, that you didn't take the komets out of it yet. So we still consider it the same status as shirayim, so that we can apply the rule of Rabbi Zera, that one shirayim does not nullify another shirayim, and that also means that one shirayim will not nullify tebel. So that's just a general rule that shirayim does not nullify tebel. And Rav Chisda can explain that our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Zera. So that's an answer. Tashema. Now the next challenge is going to be the opposite way against Rabbi Chanina. Komets. שנתערב במנחה שלא נקמסה לא יקטיר, ואם יקטיר זו שנקמסה עלתה לבעלים, וזו שלא נקמסה לא עלתה לבעלים, ולה כמבטל לתבלה לקומץ. If you take the komets from korban mincha A, and it got mixed up with a different korban mincha B in a separate bowl, it was dropped in there, and that is just tebel. So therefore, you should not that bowl with tebel plus the komets mixed into it. You should not burn it on the mizbeach because some of it's tebel. Tebel doesn't go on the mizbeach. B'diavad, if you did put it, if you did burn it, then you fulfilled the obligation for the first one because you took the komets from it. Not the second one because you didn't take the komets. But the first one, yes. Now, we don't say that the komets from A is batel in the tebel of B. So why not? Look at batel letibla komets. Why don't we say it's batel? There's certainly a lot more from the tebel of mincha korban mincha B compared to the komets of mincha A. But we said mincha A fulfills the obligation of the owner, mincha B doesn't, but A does because it's not batel. Maneh ira banan amre olin hu deba de la limbatili hadadeh ha'amin bemino batil. If we follow the banan, they said only that if both items are to be burnt on the mizbeach, then they're not mevatel. But here, only the komets goes on the mizbeach. The tebel should not go on the mizbeach, and therefore we apply min b'mino. Yes, it is min b'mino. It's the same type, and it should be batel. So therefore, the komet should be batel and not fulfill the obligation for the owner of that first korban mincha. Ela pishita Rabbi Yehuda. Fine. So then that has to be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says min b'mino la batil. Bishlam alaman damar batar mebatel azlinan. But now we're assuming that we're going to follow Rabbi Chia, who says that even Rabbi Yehuda limits his rule. And min b'mino lo batil, it depends which way you go. So if we follow Rav Chisda, who says that we analyze the mevatel, which in this case would be the tebel, the majority. Mevatel have kebatel dechol purta chazi lemikmatz mineh v'have lemin mumino umin b'mino la batil. So the tebel can become like the thing that is the minority, like the komets, because from anywhere, not the whole thing can't become a komets, but you could potentially take from any bit of the bowl of the tebel and take a komets from it, and that will become a komets, like the thing that is the minority, which is itself a komets. And therefore, this is min b'mino, and according to Rav Chisda, in this direction, min b'mino is not batel, and therefore the Mishnah makes sense. We want it not to be batel, so that komets that was thrown in there, which eventually gets burnt, because the whole thing gets burnt, will be valid. That's good. Ela leman de'amar batar batel azlinan komets mi kahave tibla. But according to Rabbi Chanina, who says we analyze the batel, that's the komets from korban mincha A that fell into it. Well, that komets can never turn into tebel. You can't undo a komets, and therefore it should be batel according to Rabbi Chia, as interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda. It should be batel, and therefore the owner of A should not fulfill his obligation. Lema de lo Rabbi Chia, should we say that the Mishnah does not follow Rabbi Chanina? And the answer is Haname kede Rabbi Zera. Indeed, we can give the same answer that we did in the first case to defend Rav Huna. We can give this to defend Rabbi Chanina. And there's the general rule that a komets does not nullify a komets, and a shiraim does not nullify a shiraim. And here the komets fell into tebel. That tebel is itself the potential, will become komets and shirayim. So part of it is going to be komets, and komets does not nullify komets. Rabbi Zera evidently also says that komets cannot mevatel shirayim, nor a shirayim a komets, nor a tebel would be mevatel a komets, or the other way around. So it's not only komets and komets, or shirayim and shirayim, but all the combinations will not mevatel each other according to Rabbi Zera, and so we answer this also like Rabbi Zera. So now we ask the third question, and this question actually is going to be a challenge not only against Rabbi Chanina, but also against Rav Chisda, as we'll see. Tashema, nitarev kumsa b'shirayim shel chaverta, lo yaktir, v'miktir, alta la be'alim. The Mishnah taught that if you took a kometz from Korban Mincha A, and that kometz got mixed up in the shirayim, not into tebel, but just the shirayim of another Korban Mincha B, then lechatechila, you should not burn that mixture because the mixture has shirayim, and shirayim shouldn't be burnt. However, b'diavad, if you did burn the whole thing on the Mizbeach, then you fulfill the obligation for the owner of Korban Mincha A, because his entire kometz went on the Mizbeach, and we don't say that the shirayim will nullify that kometz. Now, in this case, v'hacha delahave mevatel kebatil. The mevatel, that's the majority, the shirayim, cannot turn into the kometz, because once something is shirayim, that's it. You took the kometz already from it. There's no way that any of that can ever become kometz. Now, and actually, the other way also doesn't work. The kometz can never become like the shirayim, so neither can ever become the other. And therefore, according to both Rav Chisda and Rabbi Chanina, they should be batel. Either way should be batel. And so now we have a challenge. Yet the Mishnah says, here the leftover does not overpower and nullify the kometz, because the kometz still is considered burnt and fulfills the obligation of the owner. So how could this be? Maneh, who are we going to follow? Ira banan, if we're going to follow the rabbis, ... As we said before, if you follow the rabbis, then only if it's all stuff that's burnt. But here the shirayim is not supposed to be burnt, and it's min b'mino. And if it's min b'mino, that's batel, according to the rabbis. If it's b'Yehuda, well then it's only min b'mino is not batel, only if it's something that can turn into the other thing. But here, neither can turn into the other. And so it should also be batel. And we answer, as we did before, Amar Rabbi Zera, we quote it again, Nemra haktara b'komes and haktara b'shirayim. Ma haktara mura b'komes en komes batel et chabero, af haktara mura b'shirayim en shirayim b'batelin et hakometz, since it says the word haktara regarding the kometz, that you have to burn it, and it says the same word haktara regarding the remainder, that you cannot burn it, but we compare the two, just like regarding the burning of the kometz, one kometz is not going to nullify the other, so too regarding the leftover, one shirayim will not nullify the other, and neither will shirayim nullify the kometz, as in this case. And so our Mishnah follows Rabbi Zera. Last question, Tashema. And this will be against Rav Huna only. Tibela bekesach b'shum shemin b'chol minei tablin keshera. Masahi ela shenikret masa metubelet. If you have matzah on Pesach, this is halacha, good halacha l'maaseh nowadays. So the matzah that you eat to fulfill your obligation of eating matzah has to be matzah aniyah. And you can't put sugar and honey and other things in it. Now, what if you want to put some spices on it? So you have matzah, and you put black cumin, sesame, other types of spice on it. It's still kosher, it's still valid, it's still called matzah. It's just that it's called seasoned matzah. But it's still matzah, and it's still valid. This would also apply to a korban mincha that you cook into matzot, and you put some spices on it. It will still be considered a proper korban. Good. Let's assume right now that this would be true even if you put more spices than the matzah itself. You put so much sesame that there's more sesame seeds than there is matzah itself. And yet, we're not going to say that it's batel. Bishlama leman damar batel azlinan batel have kimevatel telechi mi apesha havala ke. So this makes sense according to the Rabbi Chanina, who says that we analyze the batel, the thing that is the minority, which in this case is the matzah, because in fact the status of the matzah, it can become like the status of the spices. How so? In that once the matzah becomes moldy, then it will become like the spices, in that you cannot use it for the mitzvah of eating matzah anymore once it gets moldy. So they can turn into it. Since it can turn into the other thing, therefore it is not batel. That's fine. According to the Bichanina, if it's not batel, that's good. Then you can eat it and fulfill your mitzvah of eating matzah. Elaman damar batal mevatel azinan tavlin mi kahavu matzah. But according to Rav Huna, who says we follow the majority item, and there's majority of sesame seeds. Well, sesame seeds can never turn into kosher matzah that you can use to fulfill your obligation. That will never happen, and therefore there should be bitul, and the mevatel, the sesame seed, should mevatel, nullify the matzah, and then there's no matzah here, and you can't fulfill your obligation. So how will Rav Huna explain this? Baraita, hacha maskinan tela apish la tavlin deruba masahi vela batla. No, we have to say that this is a case where there are not more spices than there is matzah. The majority is matzah, and therefore it's not batel because it doesn't matter. We follow the majority, so a minority of spices is not going to nullify the matzah. Daikaname dekatane masahi ela shenikret masa metubelet shma mina. And this actually fits with the wording of the Baraita better because it says it is matzah, just called seasoned matzah. So you would only call it seasoned matzah if there's a majority matzah. Otherwise, if it was mostly sesame seeds, you'd call it sesame seeds mixed with a little matzah. Sometimes kids have French fries with so much ketchup. You say, oh, you're having some French fries with your ketchup, right? That would be the main thing. But it doesn't say that here. It says it is matzah. It's just seasoned. So therefore it makes sense that the matzah is the majority anyway. So therefore Rav Huna will not have a problem. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.